Okay, picture this. A super advanced F-35 fighter jet, one of the most sophisticated pieces of military tech in the world, shoots down a pretty basic Iranian drone. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a minor clash over a busy shipping lane. But what if I told you that one single event was actually a very deliberate message, and not just for Iran, but for the whole world? Well, in this explainer, we're going to deconstruct that message, dig into the high-stakes strategy behind it, and look at the global credibility problem it creates. So let's zoom in on the location. This whole thing goes down in the Strait of Hormuz. And this is not just any old patch of water, it's one of the most critical strategic choke points on the entire planet. Think about it, something like a third of all the oil that travels by sea passes through this tiny channel every single day. So any kind of military dust up here doesn't just make the news, it can send major shockwaves through the global economy, turning a local problem into a worldwide crisis fast. All right, so with the stakes that high, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What exactly happened and when? You really have to understand the timeline to start seeing the strategy at play here. So this whole thing didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The sources point out that just a few hours before the drone incident, Iranian gunboats were actually harassing a U.S. oil tanker. I mean, a pretty clear provocation. That got sorted out, but then came the main event. A U.S. F-35 takes out an Iranian drone that was getting way too close to an American aircraft carrier. A direct military response. And the backdrop for all of this? Get this, it all happened just days before the US and Iran were supposed to sit down for nuclear talks. The timing, well, it's definitely interesting. You know, from the US point of view, the most important number in this entire incident is a big fat zero. The Pentagon immediately said the drone was shot down in self-defense, plain and simple, to protect the carrier and its crew. The result? No American service members were hurt and no US equipment was damaged. So the whole thing was framed as this successful, clean, and most importantly, controlled defensive move. So on one hand, you have a direct military face-off. But then you have this. Then President Trump comes out and confirms that, yep, despite the shootdown, the talks are still on. This is where it gets really complicated, right? You've got military action over here and diplomats talking over there. It feels like a mixed message, but really it's a strategic puzzle. And it makes you wonder, what is the actual playbook here? Well, to make sense of all these contradictory signals, we can look at what some experts are saying. A former National Security Council Chief of Staff, Alex Gray, actually called this part of Iran's normal playbook. So let's dig into what that actually means. And this is really where you see the gap between what's said and what's done. According to Gray's analysis, Iran might say publicly that it wants to negotiate, but the alleged strategy is to use those talks to, as he puts it, obfuscate and avoid making real concessions. So they might talk about their nuclear program, but they've reportedly drawn a hard line, saying their ballistic missiles and their support for terrorist proxies, yeah, those are not on the table. And that term, proxies, is super important to get. Think of it like this. These are groups that Iran sponsors to do its bidding. This lets Iran stir things up all over the region and carry out attacks, all while maintaining a bit of plausible deniability. They can kind of say, hey, it wasn't us. It's a huge part of modern warfare and a major headache for the US. So you can see why from the American side, this is way bigger than just one drone. According to Gray, the US has three core demands, their absolute bottom line. They want Iran to completely halt its nuclear program, stop developing ballistic missiles, and cut off all support for the proxies that are making the region unstable. These are the big red lines that are shaping US policy. But here's the thing. Getting Iran to meet those demands isn't just about putting pressure on Tehran. How the US responds to something like this sends ripples all around the world. And that leads to what you could call the credibility dilemma. This really puts policymakers in a tough spot. I mean, if this is Iran's playbook, provocations and mixed signals, what's the right way for the US to respond? How do you protect your own interests when it feels like your adversary is playing by a totally different set of rules? To even start answering that, we have to talk about a huge concept in geopolitics, deterrence. It's not about winning a war, it's about being so strong and credible that nobody wants to even start one with you. It's all about making the other guy think, you know what, attacking them is just not worth the consequences. So the question is, was shooting down that one drone enough to reestablish deterrence? And this quote from Alex Gray just nails it. He argues that a president's single most powerful tool is their credibility. What the US does in the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a message for Iran. He says, and I quote, everything is watched by China, Russia, and others. And what are they looking for? Any sign of weakness. Any hint that the US won't back up its words could encourage them to test American resolve somewhere else. So, If you need to show you mean business without kicking off a massive war, what are your options? Gray lays out a few very specific, targeted ideas. And notice, this isn't about toppling the government. He's talking about limited, proportional strikes designed to send a clear message. Things like hitting Iranian energy platforms, their naval ships, or assets belonging to the powerful IRGC.
And this all leads us to the biggest question of all. What's the endgame here? Is the goal just to contain Iran's behavior, or is there a much bigger objective in mind? This is where the debate over limited action versus, well, something much more dramatic comes into play.
The sources really show two different schools of thought here. On one side, you have the argument for action, that the Iranian regime is weaker than it's been in decades, and this could be a historic opportunity for regime change. But then you have the argument for restraint, which Bray touches on. He suggests that the U.S. has bigger fish to fry, like managing major rivals like China and Russia. Getting bogged down in another messy regime change effort in the Middle East could be a massive distraction. And that right there, that's the tightrope walk of being a global superpower. You have this one incident, a single drone over a narrow strait, but how you respond echoes across the entire globe. It's this constant, incredibly difficult balancing act. So the question we're left with is, how does a country project strength in one corner of the world without risking its vital interests everywhere else? And honestly, there's no easy answer to that one.